Just want to say thank you to Claudia and the Hammer for having me. I'm really, really excited to start off Bee Week here, and also thank you guys for coming. Hope you guys enjoy the talk. So yeah, all right. Fun audience day. um, okay, so this is called the ABCs of native bees. So I'm going to talk you through the basics of native bees and also what you all can do as far as conservation as well. So let's get started. A little bit about myself. As you can tell, I'm a photographer, also a speaker, which I'm doing right now, as well as an artist. So with artwork, I primarily work with ballpoint pen and sugar. My artwork actually led to my bee work because when I was initially doing artwork, I was just drawing off of other people's drawings, but then I was like, hey, I want to do something more original. So this is actually a photo that I took of my friend. She's one of the founding members of Black Lives Matter. I actually got a camera that I can use to take pictures for my artwork and then also for my macro photography. I'm also a speaker, which you can clearly tell. And regarding my photography, primarily I take pictures in California. But if you notice this pyramid here, it's clearly not California. I travel a little bit out of state. But what I mainly photograph are bees, native bees, the plants that they visit, as well as the beautiful locations that they inhabit. This is actually the Cistern Trail in the Santa Monica Mountains. All right, so community science. I consider myself a community scientist. So what is that? A community scientist is a scientist who doesn't hold a degree in the field that they study. This is a term that has primarily been used in the English-speaking world in the United States. It used to be called citizen science, but I'm sure you guys are pretty familiar with the politics over the last few years. Citizen sort of changed from whether or not you didn't have a degree to whether or not you had papers or not. So to be more inclusive, we call ourselves community scientists. So what I do again is I photograph bees in their environments, document their behavior. I actually have an Excel sheet that I use for every single location that I visit, updated every year with things like times, dates, weather. It's actually one of the ways that I keep track of climate change. Okay. All right, so how I got started. Has anyone ever seen this quote before? Yep. If the bee disappeared off the surface of the globe, then man would only have 4 years of life left. No more bees, no more pollination, no more plants, no more animals, no more man. That's attributed to Albert Einstein. So of the people who've seen this quote before, how many people know it's not true? Yeah. Someone's standing up there. Yes, yes. So yeah, I, like a lot of people, saw this quote and actually believed it was true. And actually, another thing that's interesting about this is Einstein never actually said this. If you're at all familiar with Einstein, he passed away in 1955. This quote was first showed up in the internet in like the late 90s. But yeah, I was like, I'm really motivated to help save bees, and I was like, oh, that means honeybees. So I went out and took photos, and this is with my cell phone, of bees that I thought I needed saving, honeybees. So I spent a lot of time with just these bees. Just a lot of photos of just honeybees. Just like, seriously, a lot of photos. And then I took this picture, and it's clearly a bee, but it's not a honeybee. And I had absolutely no idea what it was. So I went to the people who at the time I thought were bee experts, which were beekeepers. And they also had no idea what this bee was, which was really interesting. And then out of all the places, I ended up turning to Facebook, which is a really great place to get factual information. But it turned out to be really great. There was a group full of militologists, and in that group, there was a subgroup of people called militologists, and militologists are people who study bees. And they told me pretty quickly that this is actually a native bee, which is a term I'd never heard before. And they were also the first people who made me aware of the fact that it's actually native bees, not honeybees, that are the ones that are threatened or endangered. And this kind of like changed my whole perspective on what I was doing. I was like, oh my gosh, I spent so much time on the wrong bees. So I went out to try and photograph more of these native bees, but for some reason, I just wasn't seeing them. I kept going back to the same place I was photographing the honeybees. I saw so many honeybees, but no native bees. And then the Crescent Farm, which is at the LA Arboretum, I don't know if anyone's heard of that. Definitely check it out. Their horticulturalist took some pictures of about 5 or 6 species of native bees he'd seen in one day. And I was like, okay, this is really weird. I've been looking around for months and I haven't seen any. Why are there so many here? So on my first visit there, I took these photos. So these are all different species of native bees. And what's really cool here too is I just want to point this out. You can actually tell males from females by how they carry pollen. So if you see pollen on the back leg, only females do that. Oops, males don't collect pollen at all. But okay, so one thing that is really interesting about the Crescent Farm that I realized why there are so many native bees is because of the native plants. So native bees attract native plants. I wasn't seeing native bees before because there weren't native plants around. So what is a native plant? A plant is considered native if it has occurred naturally in the particular region or ecosystem it currently resides in without human introduction. So the same thing applies to bees as well. They could be native to all of the United States, they can be native to California, or even an area as small as your zip code. So native plants and native bees. Native plants can potentially have a symbiotic relationship with native insects or native or other creatures that visit them, meaning they rely on one another to survive. So save the native bees also means save the native plants. So saving native plants helps save a lot of different pollinators besides bees, but also like birds, bats, butterflies, so many other creatures. All right, so I want to just break down the differences between honeybees and native bees because I feel like a lot of times I tell people that I'm a native bee, so it can be kind of confusing, but I feel like this is a really simple breakdown. First off, honeybees are not threatened or endangered. Native bees are potentially threatened or endangered. Honeybees, the ones that are in the US, they're subspecies of a whole bunch of different European species and one of the African subspecies. Native bees are from where they currently reside, just like the native plants. Honeybees drink water provided by people. So if you have a native garden and you're putting water out for the bees, guess which bees you're attracting? Honeybees, not native bees. Native bees get all of their hydration from plants, so that's why they don't need water provided by people. Honeybees are also generalist pollinators, which a lot of people think this is great because you'll see them on all plants, but they're not actually that great of pollinators. They have about a 5% pollination rate, which is really low. Very inefficient, yes. Native bees can also be generalist pollinators, but they can also be specialist pollinators, meaning they can pollinate a whole family of plants, one genus, or even just one species. Honeybees, I'll get into this a little bit later, but they can also be detrimental to native bees. So they can outcompete them for resources. There's also something called deformed wing virus, which honeybees get from varroa mites. And it was thought to only impact honeybees, but we've actually found that there are adult honeybees that are carriers. So they're not physically impacted by it, but they'll visit all of these flowers that are around them and they'll actually infect the pollen. And then pollen is given to baby bees. It's what they eat. So we're starting to see bumblebees actually take this pollen that's infected back to their hives. And I don't know if anyone's ever seen a video with an adult bumblebee with small wings. It's because of their close proximity to honeybees. And I'll get into this more a little bit too, but native bees are also threatened by climate change. Honeybees live in colonies. Native bees, approximately 2/3 are ground nesting, 1/3 are cavity nesting, and 9 out of 10 are solitary. All right, so I'm going to be saying a lot of Latin names in a bit, and just not to confuse anybody, I thought this was a great slide just to kind of explain what they are. So these are all taxonomic categories for describing all organisms on life, and I decided to use humans as an example because there's a lot of humans in this room. So our common name is human or people. Scientific name is Homo sapiens. So that's our genus, which is Homo, and our species, which is sapiens. So when you're talking about plants, a lot of other insects, or I'm talking about bees, typically you say the genus and the species. So here's an example of that. This is a Perdita nasuta, so genus and species. Cool. So this is also my very first specialist pollinator and my first contribution to community science. So I do a lot of photography other than just insects. I was doing astrophotography in the Mojave Desert, and as I was just kind of like wandering around Death Valley, as one does, I saw this bee. And really tiny bee, about 3 to 4 millimeters, visiting this Eriogonum plant or buckwheat plant. And this was my first contribution to community science because this is the male right here. And you see how he has this little like duck face? It's called the Clypeus facial feature. A lot of militologists, the way they study bees is through pan trapping. So they'll put out a trap. Anything that flies by will fly into there and die. They'll study the dead specimens. But with community science, a lot of us are just doing it through photography. So no one actually knew what this facial feature was for because no one had actually studied this bee alive before. But since I was out there, I actually photographed the male using the facial feature, and this only took like less than 30 minutes. It's not really clear what the male in the back is doing, is actually holding the female captive. So he has her antennae trapped on either side of his little Clypeus feature so she can't fly away, and he's attempting to mate with her, and she's clearly not that happy. You can see her little legs kicking up at him. So not 100% like a positive feature, but still kind of cool. But yeah, what was also really, really interesting about this plant is all of the creatures on it had the same sort of coloration as the plant. So you could just tell that they all had evolved together. Like this bee will only visit this plant. A lot of these other insects also only visit the plant as well. So I just think that's really fascinating. So small ecosystems, these are my favorite kind of ecosystems. Like a lot of times people think of a whole desert, a mountain range or forest or something like that as an ecosystem. But these bees, they're called Perdita minima, they visit a sand mat, which could be about like 2 feet by 2 square feet, so really tiny. And this is actually the smallest known bee in North America and possibly the smallest bee in the world. If you look at the flowers here on the quarter, these are the flowers that the bees are on, so they're about the size of a letter on a quarter. And what's really cool about these bees is if you want to find them, you look for the plant because this is the only plant that they're on. And then also, this is called a Lasioglossum dialectus, and it's one of the hardest bees to ID to species. But because cameras and photography is getting so much better, I was actually able to get an identification on this bee to species because of these photos. So I think that's just really cool. So it kind of tells you where the world of science is going. Another thing that's really amazing about this is I was talking about ecosystems. All of these creatures live in this like very tiny 2 square foot sand mat. So I have a lot of wasps on the outside, but this is really cool. Besides the Perdita minima, it's my favorite. This is a mite. It's about 0.5 to 0.7 millimeters, and it's the fastest land animal on Earth relative to its size. So if it was the size of a person, it'd run about 1,300 miles an hour, opposed to a cheetah, which runs about 60. So a little bit faster, which is also why the photo is kind of blurry. So yeah. All right, so I made a video, which the neighbors absolutely loved me when I went to this just neighborhood and was kind of like rolling around on the ground. But yeah. So this is one of the wasps from the photo just taking a little bath. She's about 1.7 millimeters. We have a harvester ant next to a honeypot ant, and the harvester ant looks huge. So here's the Perdita minima. And what's really cool about this bee is you can actually identify this bee to tribe, which is another taxonomic category, by the behavior. So she's doing a tripod stance right here. She's actually putting pollen on her chest. And then when she goes into the tripod stance, she takes it off her chest, licks it with her mandibles, and packs it on her back legs. And then she flies that home to her little ground nest, and that's what her baby bees eat. And there's a little thrips right next to her, just to tell you how small she is. Thank you. Yeah, so I talked about symbiotic relationships in the bee world, but they also exist in the wasp world as well. So this is a wasp that I just think is really cool. You can identify a lot of creatures by the plants that they visit. So this is a wasp that you can actually identify because of the plant that it's on. But it doesn't just exist in the insect world as well. If anyone's seen Finding Nemo or is really into nature, which I'm guessing a lot of you guys are, this is one that people are really familiar with, clownfish and sea anemones. The clownfish attracts food to the sea anemone, so it gets food that way. The clownfish gets protection by the sea anemone's sting, so it doesn't get stung. It has a coating on its body. But yeah, they live together really happily. This is an example of how climate change can impact a symbiotic relationship. I don't know if anyone remembers, I think it was 2019 and 2020, there were fires in Australia. So there's a giant oceanic dip hole that happens every single year. That year, the basically a lot of moisture was sucked out of Australia and it was dumped into Eastern Africa. There was a lot of flooding there, but the drought in Australia caused these huge fires and it burnt up a lot of the eucalyptus. And koalas, they only eat eucalyptus. So a lot of them that survived the fire actually ended up starving. But because koalas are really cute, fluffy, people really like them, so a lot of people jumped into action to save them. A lot of people are very, very scared of them. They're worried about being stung, so they're not jumping into action the same way. So what can we do? There's a lot of things we can do. I think these are three of the easiest things. We can document to raise awareness. We can all plant native plants in our yards, or if you don't have a yard, encourage your friends, family members to do the same thing. Also join a BioBlitz or a nature walk. All right, so has anyone heard of Arlington Garden? Woo, okay, great. I absolutely love Arlington Garden. It's free to go. You can go anytime. Absolutely beautiful. But this observation here is an example of what is happening a lot in nature. This is a really common bee. It's called a Xylocopa sonorina. This is a male. And I still haven't seen this bee in the garden for years. And at the time I was looking, I was one of the very few people looking, possibly the only person, so I thought the bee was no longer at the garden. But they started doing nature walks, and the very first nature walk, someone took this photo. It's the bee doing a little drive-by, so the bee is still there. So this is kind of what's happening in nature. There's a lot of things that we could possibly miss just because of not a lot of people are looking. So that's why I always really encourage anybody to get into community science. So it doesn't have to be out in nature. It could also be in your own backyard. Has anyone heard of iNaturalist? Yeah, great. So yeah, iNaturalist, great app to use. You could use it on your phone, computer, but just I see people hiking all the time with their phones out, so you can take pictures while you're hiking. I also created two projects down here, California native bees and Los Angeles native bees. So if you want to look for bees that are native just to your area, you could type in your zip code. Those bees will actually show up. And this is one of the projects, the California native bees, and look at all the observations here. Quite a few. All right, Santa Monica Mountains, also one of my favorite places to visit. This is actually the first place I started going when I was looking in nature for bees. I like to link bees to plants, so you can actually know what bees are present based on what plants are present. You can look for this bee. This is a Diadacia by tuberculata. It's a ground nesting bee. Here's a male and female keeping the population going. This is really cute. So this is a female. They build little chimney structures called turrets to stop predators or nature from disturbing their ground nests. And these look kind of funny. These are a female with her feet in there. She's covered with pollen and she couldn't fit down her turret. So she's actually sleeping right there. So her little feet were kind of kicking back and forth, but it was really cute. And my friend, if you ever go to Satwiwa or the Mishimoka Trail, he's retired, so he has a lot of free time. But for about 3 months, for the past 5 years, he goes every single day, lays on the ground, and records these bees. So this was, I think, 2020 maybe, but yeah. So these are all solitary bees. When solitary bees live together, it's called an aggregation. It's like a neighborhood, so they all have their own house, but they have next door neighbors as well. And what's really amazing about these guys is They can sting, but they rarely do. I've never been stung by them. My friend who's been out there for years has also never been stung by them. You can walk amongst these guys, and they're really, really cute. Just gonna skip past that. So some other bees that you'll actually start to notice with those flowers are Eucera, which are longhorn bees, and Duphoria. So these bees are also really cool because they actually sleep in the flowers. So if you want to find some bees, some of the easiest ways to do it is to show up really early in the morning, look for flowers that open and close, and you'll find male bees sleeping in them. So male bees typically don't live in the ground. They'll like sleep on stems or in flowers. So if you see like an Asteraceae, like California brittlebush, or a deerweed, these bees will start to show up. So this is a Habropoda. This is an Anthophora, and these two are a really good clear way to identify male from female. So this Clypeus facial feature, like you saw the male before who had the duck face, this guy has kind of a flatter face, but he has that structure there, so that's something males have. Females don't have that, but they do have the back legs, which are really fluffy, which they use to carry pollen. This is an Anthophora male who has that Clypeus facial feature. Again, he looks like he's smiling. He also has this little I guess fan, you would call it, on his middle leg. So he uses that when he's mating with the female to cover up her eyes and antennae. Yeah, a lot of, yeah, males. So this is a hoplitis bee. She doesn't actually carry pollen on her back legs. She carries it on the underside of her abdomen. These are a couple more bees. You can see another hoplitis here who carries pollen on the underside of her abdomen. This is actually a kleptoparasitic bee. So this is a bee where the males and the females don't create burrows or collect pollen. They actually go into the burrow of other bees, lay an egg, their egg hatches and either kills or consumes the larva of the host bee and eats all the pollen that was provisioned. So they're like natural population control. So they're a healthy part of an ecosystem. This is a male megachile bee. A lot of male bees, if they don't have that Clypeus facial feature, they have a lot of facial hair, so they'll either have like mustaches or just a lot going on there. The males also have longer antennae than the females, so you could also tell this is a male osmia. So climate change close to home. This is the Santa Monica Mountains, which is absolutely beautiful, but a lot of the times in the year it's very, very dry, and that's really been exacerbated by climate change. Also, a lot of people have been moving there as well. So with the drought, there's a lot of concern with fires. So a few years ago, I think it was maybe 2020 or 2021, there was a certain conservancy, I won't say which one, they started going through with tractors and bulldozers and actually cutting down a lot of the native plants. So there was an area I had been visiting at that point up, I want to say about 6, 7 months, and I had photographed so many bees there, and I never took a before picture. This was actually the location that inspired me to take landscape photos because I started noticing a lot of really beautiful areas were being destroyed. But I also want to highlight some of the bees that I photographed at this area. And I've been going back and visiting a few times yearly, and they've also been returning as well with the tractors and the bulldozers and cutting the plants down again. So I actually haven't seen any native bees at this location since I think 2021. All right, so I think this is a really important map. It first came out in 2022. It highlights where biodiversity is and where there's a big diversity decline. And if you notice, California is bright red. So this map is really, really important because it highlights a lot of creatures that typically a lot of conservationists ignore. So it also highlights bees, fish, mussels, crayfish, a lot of things like that. And with this map, it kind of an overlay here. So only 13% of the US is currently protected. So the Biden administration actually came up with a plan called 30 by 30. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but they want to bump up that 13% to 30 by the year 2030. So hopefully that happens. But why is California so biodiverse? It's because we have a Mediterranean climate. So Mediterranean climates are really unique areas. It only takes up about 2% of Earth's land, but it has 20% of Earth's biodiversity. Western side of the country, it's also next to a very large, cooler ocean, and on the eastern side is a mountain range. All right, so Anza Borrego, has anyone been there? Yes, okay. I absolutely love Onzabrego. It's one of my favorite places in Southern California. But this bee is called a Megachile brownii, and it's the first photo of a living representative of its species. And I went to Onzabrego, this was 2 years ago now, and photographed this bee while I was looking for a different one. And it wasn't until I got home that I realized, hey, this is a bee no one's seen in the last like 15 years and no one's photographed before. So I was like, okay, I have to go back. But at the time I had a desk job, so I had to wait until Saturday to return. But at the time too, it was basically like over 100 degrees every single day. The day I returned, it actually hit 117. So the plant that it was on is a Sorothamus bush. So this is what it's supposed to look like. But because of the drought and the heat, this is actually what it looked like. So the first day I was there, I photographed, I saw about 100 native bee species, or native bees there, individuals. When I went back, it was completely covered in honeybees. I didn't see any native bees. But I was there so early in the morning, and I guess maybe it was a combination of the heat, something with weather. And as the rain came in, the hum of the bees just completely disappeared. And after the rain stopped, I saw these beautiful double rainbows show up. And I decided, you know what, let me just walk around these smoke trees one more time. And I did. And I saw one lone Megachile brownie. She was drying herself off from the rain. And once she dried herself off, she flew away. And then the honeybees returned. I like to use this as an example of what is happening in nature, because people just keep bringing honeybees and more honeybees out into nature. And these bees can just fly so far. They have about a 2-mile radius that they can fly from their hive. And this was out in the middle of nowhere. So these were obviously domesticated honeybees that got out into nature. They're out competing these bees for resources. So it's not just in our neighborhoods that this is happening as well. Trinity Alps. This was my very first big trip for bees. And this is also a trip where I realized I wasn't as in shape as I thought I was. So it was backpacking, and it was only like 9.5 miles. And I was like, oh, 9.5 miles, that's nothing. But it was straight up, and it took about an hour a mile. And I think it was by mile 4 where I was really over it. But I made it up to the top, went there because I was looking for this bee, which is Bombus franklini. So no one's seen this bee since August 2006. And what's really interesting about this bee as well, even though no one's seen it since August 2006, it wasn't until 2022, where it was actually listed as endangered. So this is a bee that might possibly be extinct. But I've been going every year since 2022 to find it. And this was my first attempt and didn't end up finding it, but I found this bee. This is called a Lasioglossum cymbrialicus, and this is also the first photo of a living representative of this bee. It's a high elevation specialist as well. And what's really interesting about the area that we went to, I was there for about 10 days. The day that I was doing that 9.5 miles back, a fire actually started, so the whole area went up in smoke. This is another really cool one. I was out with my friend Michelle. Whenever I'm out somewhere like new and the sun's starting to set or it's early in the morning, I look for sleeping bees. This bee was actually sleeping about 2 feet in front of my car. And it's a bee no one has actually seen since 1957. And what's really cool about it too, it's a parasitic bee. So it has a host species. And no one knew what the host species was, again, because everyone was collecting it. So just being out there, I ended up photographing what the host species was and documenting it. So this is another really good example of what can happen if you're just out there looking. Anyone can do this. It's just community science. This is another really cool example of community science. I got invited to go to Belize with a bunch of bat people. And yeah, I was the odd one out there. But there was a nocturnal bee that I really wanted to see. It hadn't been seen in that area or that time of year, but I was like, you know what, I don't have any other options, any other times to go because these bat people are going now. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna join you guys. Also was not prepared at all, so went out there with some clothes hangers and put some towels over the clothes hangers. I had a flashlight and a black light. And I was like, let me just see what shows up. And in 10 minutes, shockingly, the bee showed up. My friend and I went to celebrate after with these like huge drinks that are this tall. My friend had been drinking them the entire time, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're so nice for buying this for me. And then I found out like a few days later it was like $2. But yeah, I was just really happy to see that nocturnal bee. I wanted to give you guys some examples to follow as well. So this is a reserve that has restricted access. It's called Indian Wells. And it's restricted access, one, because you can't get onto the reserve unless you are with the UC system or have special permission, and also because it's gatekept behind a neighborhood. So it's actually behind a neighborhood with very, very well-off people that you probably know some of their names, but the neighborhood actually just has this small sign. So you can't even GPS your way to it. There's no front sign in the neighborhood, so it's very hidden. But I was able to get access there, drove through this neighborhood that I think everyone would love to live in someday, and then got to the reserve, and at the parking spot, I found this bee. It's called the Perdita dentata, and this was a bee that no one had seen since 1963, right in the neighborhood. So this is an example of how gatekeeping can actually protect areas because it's so restricted access. And this is just a really beautiful small bee. It's a Phacelia specialist too, so you can find them in the Colorado desert in California on Phacelia at the early part of the year. This is my friend Devlin Gandy. He bought some land in the Topa Topa Mountains, or the Sesapes. This is him at sunset, looking very handsome there. This is sunset over the area. And what's really cool is this bee is there. So he is protecting the area for conservation. This is another kleptoparasitic bee. She was actually sneaking into the burrow of another bee. That's her host species right there, just hanging out on a rock. And I think this is really important to highlight. So this is the Central Valley near Helm, California. The Central Valley is mainly grassland, but about 90+% of it is now invasive grass or invasive plants. And the grassland used of California and San Diego County, but because there's so much farming happening here, grazing, basically destruction, it's not what it originally used to be. So I know a lot of times when people talk about farming, they talk about the negative impacts that it can have on the plants around them, but a lot of farmers now, like this is Don and his dog Lily, Don has actually been incorporating indigenous practices into his farming. So he's been building hedgerows like the one he's standing in front of. This is a really long hedgerow. You see elderberry there and some salvia. So these are actually ecosystems for a lot of native pollinators. So bees are visiting them, birds. I even saw frogs in them as well, butterflies, wasps, so many different creatures. And what's really great is the pollinators are not just pollinating the hedgerows and the native plants, they're also pollinating the plants that he has there as well. And because there's a lot of predator insects there, they're also acting as natural pest control for his farmland. So he's reducing the amount of pesticides and herbicides that he's using on his plants. And this is a really great example. There's a lot of farmers who've actually been visiting his property. It's called Terra Nova Ranch, and they've been using it as an example. So I've started to see it more so in the Central Valley. But what's really cool is this bee showed up. So this is a Perdita heliotropii, which only visits heliotrope flowers. And what's really interesting about this bee being there is Don didn't plant any heliotrope flowers. So there was an animal, maybe a bird, that actually did seed dispersal, brought those seeds for this flower to there, and then this bee that has a symbiotic relationship showed up. So the hedgerows, the native plants, the whole ecosystem that he's created is taking on a life of its own. All right, so native landscaping. This is my friend Paloma's backyard, and I had no idea her yard looked like this. She just posted this picture on Instagram, and I was like, oh my gosh, your yard's amazing. Can I stop by? And she said yes, and I just wanted to highlight some of the things that she does in her yard. I don't know if anyone's familiar with watershed landscaping. Yes, great. So what is a watershed approach? Basically, a land area drains into a waterway, such as a stream, a lake, estuary, wetland, aquifer, or ocean. So you have different areas of your garden that are higher and lower. So the water is more into these runways, and you can use it to collect. A lot of people like her use rain barrels. So about a inch of rain can give you a couple 100 gallons of water that you can use during drought time. So 3 key principles. You want to build healthy living soil that's diverse. So a lot of times when people think of diversity, they think of just plants, but it also starts with soil. You also want to treat rainwater as a resource and also plant native plants. So what's really cool about Paloma's yard is the very first time I went there, I saw this bee, and it was the first time I saw it. It's called the Perdita interrupta, and it visits California's poppies. And this is a really rare bee. And it's amazing because she created this ecosystem for this bee to inhabit. It's only an adult 1 month of the year. I think it's March or April, but she has a huge population of it. And not only does she have the rare bee, she also has an endangered bee in her yard. So again, this is an example of what you can have in your yard if you plant native plants. And maintaining a native environment, something that's really great. I've kind of touched on this a little bit, but you don't need pesticides or herbicides. I'm sure you guys know this already, but pesticides kill insects that benefit plants. Herbicides kill plants that benefit insects. And these also impact more than just their intended target. So let's just say for some reason, Paloma didn't like the California poppy bee, so she sprayed a bunch of pesticides. Who's going to pollinate the poppies? If she didn't like the poppy for some reason and she sprayed a bunch of herbicide, where were those poppy bees going to go? So if you have a healthy native ecosystem, you're going to have creatures in your yard that are going to keep a balance for you. And I like to call these indicator insects, and this is one of them. And they're very, very tiny a lot of the times, so you might miss them in your yard. Oops, go back here. There we go. So that's a little male next to a quarter, so you can see how tiny he is, little guy. And there is one at Arlington Garden as well, so they have a nice ecosystem. So how these indicator insects work is they're natural pest control for a lot of things that we necessarily don't like in our gardens, but are there as part of a healthy biodiverse ecosystem. So this is an aphid, and the wasp that I just showed you was an aphid wasp. So what the females do is they do something called ovipositing. They'll stick an egg into the body of an aphid. The aphid's body will swell up. They'll basically become a cocoon or like a mummy for the developing aphid. Also control the population there. And then when the adult wasp is ready to emerge, they'll chew a little hole out the back there. Population control. Yeah, so no pesticides needed. Some other creatures, we have lacewings. So this is an egg, this is the larva and the adult. So these control things like thrips, mealybugs, aphids as well. And this is a thrips on the plant as well. And I think one thing that's really cool about these is I've actually photographed these on a single patch of sunflowers. So I was talking before about how ecosystems can be really small. A single patch of sunflowers in your backyard can be an entire ecosystem. All right, so plant native plants that you can plant in your garden to attract bees. All right, let's see here. So this is a video from the Smithsonian.
Back in West Virginia, the diverse vegetation of the uncultivated areas between farmlands
and I think
is
this
home
is a
to the
good
best-known relative of the honeybee, the bumblebee. Some bumblebee populations are in decline, a tragedy since they are among the few bees capable of buzz pollination. This technique is the only efficient way to pollinate plants like tomatoes, eggplants, and blueberries. The bumblebee grabs the flower by the anthers, decouples its flight muscles from the wings, and uses them to shake the flower violently. The only way to get the blossom to dislodge its pollen. which the bumblebees bring back to their colony.
All right, so I think that's an amazing video that shows buzz pollination. And what's also really interesting about it, it's from the Smithsonian. And I think it's also a good example of even when things are from really reputable organizations, you should always fact check them. So I don't know if anyone noticed that there were actually different bees in this video. Yeah, so the first bee actually wasn't a bumblebee, it was a carpenter bee. So it's always good just to double check. Um, but yeah, another really interesting thing is there's 6 families of bees in the United States, and in every single one of those families, there are bees that can buzz pollinate, but honeybees actually can't. So if you have different nightshades in your garden, these are great plants to attract those buzz pollinators. And we're actually going to be trying buzz pollination a little bit later at my next talk. So if you're still around, you can try buzz pollinating some nightshades. But these are some great nightshades to have in your garden. Some other great plants to have in your garden, we have salvia and buckwheat. These are really beautiful plants and they'll attract a lot of pollinators. You can also have different asteraceae. This is a sunflower, and male bees absolutely love to sleep on these. These are male longhorn bees. We also have California poppies and cryptantha, or the popcorn plant. If you have both of these in your yard, these will attract a lot of pollinators. The interesting things about poppies is they don't actually produce nectar. So insects that have symbiotic relationships with them, they also have to visit another plant to get that nectar. So this is the Perdita interrupta that was in my friend Paloma's yard. She has both the cryptantha as well as the California poppy. Globe mallows, or just mallows, these are really cool plants. So they open and close with the sun. You'll actually see a lot of bees sleeping in these. So if you have them in your yard, right before they'll close up around them, the morning when the sun opens the blossoms, the flowers will, the bees will fly out of them. But yeah, this is a diodaceous species. This is actually a female. She's collecting pollen from them, but the males love it as well. And these are pictures of the males sleeping in the plants. So yeah, this is a little guy. I guess he's like really antsy to get out in the morning. Also cucurbits, so squash, different melons as well. This is a good time of year for squash bees. These are really early morning bees. So these flowers open with the sun, like maybe like 5, 6 a.m., and the bees are done by noon. If you see any of the leaves sort of laying on the ground, still the live leaves, lift those up. You might see little holes underneath them. The bees, the females, nest right under the leaves. You can also have redbud. So redbud will attract carpenter bees. So this is the bee that I showed you before from Arlington Garden. This is the male. This is the female. So they look very different. Also, leafcutter bees absolutely love redbud. These are examples. So this is a redbud leaf. The females will actually cut little crescent shapes out of them, and they'll fly them back to their burrows, and then they'll line their burrows with the leaves. There's also petal cutter bees that love just like larger petals. They'll do the same things with stems. This is on a salvia stem as well, actually my friend's yard. A lot of times people just think of flowers for bees, but grasses are also great as well. This is Bouteloua gracilius, which is a native plant. This is at the Crescent Farm. A lot of bees like to sleep on them. Also dried plants as well. I think this is an Asteraceae. These are a bunch of Melisotis sleeping on them. These are 2 Anthophora. So again, male bees, if you see them sleeping out at night, if they're not a kleptoparasitic bee, it's a male sleeping. This is another bee that looks a lot like a wasp, but it's actually a bee. Nomada. Penstemons and lupines, there's a lot of male bees that like to sleep inside of them. So if you have those in your yard, maybe look inside them, you might see some male bees sleeping. There's another leafcutter male. So plant stems, there's also a smaller version of the larger carpenter bee. So I was talking about the Xylocopa before, or the orange sort of carpenter bee. This is a smaller one that lives in plant stems. So if you want to create habitat for them, they really like hollow, pithy stems. So if you do cut your stems back in the fall, leave about 12 to 18 inches, and these guys will create a little nest in there. And you can just see the males versus the females. So the female has a single line on her face. The male has more of a yellow face. Also, she has the fluffy back legs for collecting pollen. This was started by the Xerces Society. Leave the leaves. Leaves are really great to leave in your yard. I know a lot of times people just like rake them up because it looks more tidy, but leaves are really great blankets for overwintering creatures. So there's a lot of caterpillars, wasps, queen bees that will sleep underneath them. It creates a blanket, and they can also breathe oxygen through them really well. If you are going to put mulch instead, I would recommend no more than 3 to 4 inches. Also, bee houses. If you are going to get a bee house, a lot of them are actually not really designed all that well for bees. So I recommend Weebee houses, or Weebee house, I guess, actually. So I'm going to walk you guys through one of their bee houses. Let's see if I can do this with my microphone. All right, so the first thing you should look for is a bee house that is at least 6 inches deep. And another thing you should look for is a house that you can actually take the little cells apart with. Because if you can't, I like to compare it to like a dog house. So let's say you have a dog that lives just 24/7 outside in their dog house and you never clean it out, the dog can get sick. So the same thing can happen with bee houses. So with Weebee houses, you can actually, sorry if you guys can't hear me, you can take the cells apart. Just kind of an example of what that looks like. But you also want to get a house that has a drawer at the top of it. And the reason is, after you take these cells apart, you actually want to clean out the cocoons and then put them in one of these drawers. The reason you want to put it in a drawer instead of back in the little cells is because female bees can control whether or not they're laying a male or a female egg. Typically, they lay males closer to the entrance and females closer to the back, which is why males emerge first. They're typically smaller and females are larger. It can be kind of hard to tell males from females, so that's why a drawer is nice. Okay. Also, if you already do have a bee house where you're not able to take apart the cells, you can get these biodegradable straws. You can actually stick them in there. There's ones that are specifically designed for bee houses that are about 6 inches deep. You can just stick those in there, unravel them when you need to clean the bees. There's also a lot of things that are designed. They say they're designed for bees, but they're not great for bees. This is one of them, a bee brick that actually went viral a while ago. You could put it in your house on the wall, but there's really no way to clean it. I'd say the best thing about these is they were recommending that you put them up so high no bee would actually visit them. But yeah, if you notice, they're only about, I think, 4 inches deep. So what can happen if you don't clean out a bee house? One of the things that can happen is mites. And it doesn't just impact the bees that are visiting the bee houses. When they get to know each other, they can also spread mites between individuals. So these are some videos that I found on YouTube that are great instructional videos for how to clean out your bee house. All right, so I was talking before about how you shouldn't put water out for bees. Is anyone noticing what bees specifically are visiting these water sources? Exactly, the honeybees, European honeybees. Yeah. So if you ever do see a bee that is on the ground that needs to be perked up a little bit, never give them honey. Honey can spread pathogens between bees. Even if you find a honeybee on the ground, don't give them honey as well unless you know it came directly from the hive where you got the honey. So what I always recommend doing is giving them a mixture of 2 parts water and 1 part sugar. And she was absolutely terrified of getting her out. So I came by like 5 hours later and used my hand as a stand for her to drink some water from. So find native plants in your area. two great resources, Theater Pain or the Audubon Society. They have these websites that you can actually put your zip code in, and it'll tell you plants that are native to your area. So you can visit some local native gardens like Theater Pain, Hahamunga, and get plants after you find ones that are native to your area. All right, so this is the first time I've done this, so hopefully you guys like it. It's a little game that I like to call Fly, Bee, or Wasp. And I thought this would be a fun game because I keep seeing things online where they're saying save the bees, adopt a bee. And if you notice, this is a children's book even, Ultimate Bee Book with the fly on there. So, all right, I was gonna basically walk you guys through identifying bees, flies, or wasps. So the first thing you look for with the fly is the large eyes. So flies' eyes take up the majority of their head. There's only one bee that has this as well. It's a male honeybee. Also, tiny antennae. They also have this feature right here called a halter. So it's in place of second set of wings. So flies have 2 wings, bees and wasps have 4. So you can see the large compound eyes, antennae, and there we go. Also, there's a single set of wings. All right, so with that said, which one, A or B, is a fly, and which one is a bee? A is a fly? Okay, why do you think A is a fly? Perfect, great, yeah, so A is a fly, B is the bee. I did do that on purpose, yeah. They look very similar. All right, so is A bee or fly, or is B a bee or fly? B is a fly? Oh, okay, someone even ID'd it to genus. Wow, okay, you guys were good. So yeah, A is the bee, and then B is the fly. So you see the large eyes again, the small antenna, the halter, large antenna, the eye that doesn't take up the large portion of the head. So yeah. Okay, so which one is the bee, which one is the fly? Okay, yeah, this one was too easy, I guess, yeah. Yeah, so we got the small antenna, the large head, the halter. You could see all 4 wings in this photo. Also, she's collecting pollen, so the flies don't collect pollen in the same way. You could see that on her back legs. Kind of hard to see, but smaller eyes. There we go. And then all 4 wings. Okay, so this feature is called an ocular sinus, and it's something that only wasps have in this way. So basically, if you look at your thumb or any finger, and if it could fit in there, that's the ocular sinus. Some bees do have a curve in their eye, but it's not the exact same feature. So with that in mind, oh, actually, one more slide, sorry. Another difference between bees and wasps. So bees technically are wasps, but I call bees vegetarian wasps. So if you see something that looks like a bee or a wasp and it's actually collecting a spider or an aphid, this case a caterpillar, then it's a wasp. So the females actually will take these back to their home and the developing wasps will consume them. So there's that caterpillar. Also, wasps sleep perched. So male bees or kleptoparasitic bees will typically sleep with their mouths clamped onto the stem that they're on. Also, you can see the round eyes. If they have very, very round eyes like that, then that's a wasp. You can't really see it that well in this picture, but very, very thin waist, kind of shaped like a pencil. That's a thread-waisted wasp. So there's round eyes, thread-waist, and sleeping in a perched position. Okay, so which one is a wasp, which one's a bee, and which one's a fly? So okay, handheld, or what? Okay. Does everyone agree with that? Yeah, okay, great. So Yep, you could see the small antennae, the large eye, the halter, single wings, so that's a fly. The ocular sinus, and sleeping with its mandibles attached to the stem. Okay. All right, what about this one? What is A? A's a, okay, everyone's saying it's A's the bee? Okay, but it has the really round eyes. Okay, so A is the wasp because of the round eyes. Okay, so B is a bee. Yeah, so if you look at the back legs right here, you see how it's kind of fluffy legs? That's for collecting pollen. And this was kind of a trick because, like, I was talking before about the ocular sinus, but you can't put your thumb or your finger in there, so it's a curve. Okay. So, can get confusing, and yeah. Okay, so C is the fly. Yeah, so again, we have the small antenna, the large eyes, and the single wings. Cool. Okay, I think this is the last one. All right, so what is A? Fly. Everyone agrees to fly? Okay, what is B? Okay, and then C? Awesome. Okay, so we got the large eyes, small antenna, the halter, pollen. And that is not a bee because she clearly has a spider there that she's taking home. Cool. Awesome. So I wanted to leave you guys with this. This is an amazing video. It was a lot of people were really creative during the pandemic. It's called My Garden of 1,000 Bees. It aired on PBS. It'll actually be playing, I think, next week on the 19th and 20th here. My Garden of 1,000 Bees, it's based in Bristol, England, I think. But what's really interesting is a lot of the genera of bees that you see in England, you can also see here as well. And a lot of their behavior is really similar. So I think it's a really great example of what you can do with your yard. It's also a really emotional journey that I did. I just think it's absolutely amazing. So what's next? I want to photograph the 4 endangered bumblebees in California. So far, I photographed 2 of them. I got Bombus crotchii and also occidentalis, which I actually got like 4 months ago, which was amazing. I was so excited. But I also want to encourage more people to get into community science. And this is a great example of people getting invested in community science. These are bees that they're not native to the US, they're native to Brazil, but a 4-year-old rediscovered these. And I think most of us are a little older than 4, so we can do it if she can. But her aunt actually got her into bees, and she saw these when she was out on a walk, and there's a huge population of them in the Palo Alto area. And they invited me up there, and I took this photo, and I was just really excited to see them. That is a stingless bee, yes. Oh, you, okay, yeah. You, not, thank you. I could tell who it is, yeah. All right. So yeah, I want to encourage more people to get into community science. California has 1,643 species of bees. Someone actually counted 2 years ago, but there's a bunch of undescribed species as well, so there's even more of them. I think it'd be great if when people thought of bees, they thought of more than just the honeybees. Also want to promote and create native landscaping bridges, which is something all of us can get involved in. So, for example, with my friend Paloma's yard, what happens if she moves and the people who move in decide to put in a European like green lawn? Where are all of those creatures going to go? So that's why I always encourage people to plant native plants themselves, but also encourage your friends, neighbors to do the exact same thing. It creates a bridge that increases the biodiversity and genetic diversity of the creatures that live there. Also, I just finished this, but National Geographic funded the last year of a coffee table book that I'm working on called The ABCs of Native Bees. Hopefully that'll be out soon, sometime soon. Also want to develop more community-led initiatives. I think one of the great things about biodiversity and getting people invested is it's something you can do in your own community. One of my friends actually lives in South Central LA, which is an area that you typically think of as a cement box. it's not something you would go to and visit for biodiversity, but she created this whole ecosystem in her yard. And I think it's really beautiful. I know the first time I went to her house, I actually realized I didn't even need her address because it was just blooming like crazy. But yeah, I think that's just an example of what everyone can do. And I see a lot of times people coming from outside of communities and leading these projects, but if the people actually there are invested, it can really help them in so many different ways as well. So, yeah. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, I think there's an usher coming around with the microphone, or maybe a few of them. What year did I start? So I started in 2018, pretty recently, which is actually, well, let me take that back. I started in 2016, and I wasn't sure if I was actually going to keep this up, so I used my cell phone for the first 2 years that I did this, and I got my camera on Black Friday in 2018 because it was on sale.
Just out of curiosity, where do hornets fit into wasps and bees?
So hornets are actually wasps. They're wasps that are eusocial, so they live in colonies, whereas wasps are typically solitary. They do collect insects as well, but they also drink nectar. I don't know if that was exactly what you're wondering, but they're great pollinators as well. A lot of the pollination they do is accidental, so a lot of pollination is actually accidental pollination.
Hey there. I work for the Chino Water Basin Conservation District. We teach like free workshops and stuff like that. We specialize in California native landscapes, and I was wondering, you have an awesome turnout here, but with our workshops, we have a hard time getting people to come in. Do you have any advice on to increase turnout?
It's kind of all over the place,
Yeah.
but I feel like social media is a great way to get people invested and involved. Also, hashtags. And if you have people who have sort of a following already, um, they can kind of lead the charge as well. Also, I would partner with organizations like the Hammer Museum. Is just like they've been around for so long and they're aligned with UCLA. I would just recommend aligning yourself with other organizations or even Theater Pain as well. They do a lot of nature walks. You can get people to actually come to those nature walks from Theater Pain's newsletters and a combination of what you're already doing. So it definitely increases the population of people coming.
What's your personal favorite bee?
My personal favorite bee, I have two. I don't know if anyone could tell because there's a lot of Perdita up here. I really like Perdita. And I really like Anthophora. They're kind of a big fluffy bee that looks like a bumblebee. Yeah, actually, I think Perdita are really cool too because they have symbiotic relationships and they're like harder to ID to species. So I feel like it's kind of a game a lot of times to see if I could figure it out. But yeah.
So by the entrance, there's a bee poster. Is that from you?
I'm pretty sure that's a honeybee.
No, there's a poster of a whole bunch of native
Oh,
bees.
okay. Sorry. No, that's not a honeybee.
Is that your poster
That's
then?
the bees in your backyard poster. So it was by two people named Joe and Olivia who created actually an amazing book. I think I have a copy here. I do.
So I saw it entering the theater, and I was wondering if the bees were to scale because I think the carpenter bee is just so much bigger. The one bumblebee and the one carpenter bee are so much bigger than all the other bees on the poster.
Oh yeah, definitely not to scale at all. Yeah, they're all blown up to be a lot larger. Actually, I think they're in the gift shop. I created some bee flashcards that have scales on them, so you can actually look at the scale there. But definitely check out this book. It goes into more detail, the bees in your backyard. There's a West Coast version, East Coast, as well as just this one's the entire US. That'll help you break down the basics of bees, find out where their names came from, which plants to plant. I absolutely love it. I think it's amazing. But yeah, the poster is really cool.
You stay safe around bees.
So most native bees they can sting. All female bees can sting, even the ones that are called stingless, but they typically don't sting. So I've held them quite a few times. I've only been stung twice. The first one was a honeybee because I had my hand stuck in a honeybee hive because I was taking photos. The second time I did the exact same thing with bumblebees, but got great footage, so it was worth it. But yeah, they typically don't sting, so I find it really difficult to get stung by them. Yeah,
I have another question. In your first slide, you showed a pyramid, or where was that?
that was in Belize.
Oh, which one was that? Because I'm going there.
Oh, I wish I knew what the pyramid was called. It was in Orange Walk District. But I actually got special permission because I was the lone bat person or bee person, and one of the residents there kind of took pity on me because I was wandering around the forest by myself. So he actually took me on a motorcycle through the forest, and he's like, "You can't walk on this pyramid, but I'm going to let you up there." So I walked on the pyramid because there was this giant nest of wasps. What were they called? Pepper wasps, I think, which you're not supposed to get by. So the reason that picture was so far back was because he was like, "Hell no." But yeah, it's you could definitely walk by the pyramids. Yeah,
It
you
wasn't
can't.
Altun, was it? Altun?
I don't know what the pyramid was called, but it was one of the ones in Orange Walk. I think there's about 4 or 5 there.
Orange Walk.
I was curious about ground dwelling bees and what kind of soil they're living in, particularly as a gardener. So I know you talked about not raking your leaves, and we do some of that. But then, should I even worry about soil if I want to be hospitable to bees that need access to sandy earth?
Yeah, so there's bees that nest in all different kinds of soil. There's alkaline bees. I'm not exactly sure where you live, but there's bees that you could just nest in typical garden soil like that you would find in LA. What I would say is most bees nest right under the plant that they're visiting. So if you do have sort of a bare patch of soil, you can maybe leave like 6 inches around there. A lot of them will nest in that. I've also noticed them nesting on bare patches kind of near sidewalks. There's stem nesting bees as well. They'll find I do find that people do disturb a lot of them when they are nesting in gardens, but they're pretty resilient, so they will find other spaces. I've disturbed so many nests on accident. But yeah, I just as long as you keep the plants nearby in a little patch of area by the plants for them to nest in, they should be pretty well. Do pretty well. Yeah.
Hey there.
Hello.
I was wondering, did you have any experience with any like stingless bees outside of the one you saw in up at where you were invited? Do you have any experience working with the native bees in any South America or any other parts of the world?
So far, my only experience is in Belize, where they weren't managed, they were out in nature. So I did spend quite a bit of time actually photographing them out there.
Okay, in rock walls or edges, dirt.
I found them mainly in dirt. I did find them in crevices one time in the back of a garden or a barn. Um, but yeah, I found them just like nesting in a lot of different areas. Were you thinking of creating like a habitat for them or?
No, there's a current movement in Central America to promote indigenous bee populations as well.
Yeah.
So women throughout Mexico and the other areas are reintroducing Melipone beechii or introducing the royal lady or the Zunan cob, the Mexican stingless honeybee, back to those ecosystems. And it's because it's been used since ancient times in the Aztec cultures and Mayan cultures all through that area. So they're trying to re-promote it through the indigenous women.
I think that's great. I would say the one thing, and this has happened with honeybees even in Europe where they're native to, is because they're so managed, they're actually acting like an invasive species in areas that they are native to. But I do think that maybe since it is the indigenous people handling it, I'm not really familiar exactly with what they're doing, but it sounds like an amazing opportunity to also create a resource for funding as well because their honey tastes absolutely delicious.
Yeah, medicinally valued in all over the world, right? So they're trying, like here in the U.S., they're trying to reincorporate native education.
Yeah, which I definitely think is wonderful too. I do think one of the really important things to do with reintroducing native education is how it's managed as well, because people were trying to move away from honeybees in the US to bumblebees. So they were doing greenhouse farming with bumblebees. But one thing that happened was because they were not allowed to leave after generations, they actually started to become inbred. So certain diseases that would disappear within a population actually started to become amplified, and some of them escaped into nature. So there is a virus that affects bumblebees specifically in the subgenus Bombus that has caused their population to decline. So a lot of the bumblebees in the US that are in that subgenus are threatened or endangered. So that's one reason why I think with like farming, with like what Don was doing at Terra Nova Ranch, just planting native plants can help.
In San Miguel Allende in Mexico, which is a heritage site, as you know, both the indigenous and all of the people who have moved there from all over the world are doing a huge project. So if you haven't been down, first of all, it's fabulous.
Yeah.
There's a lot of artwork that's being done. There's a lot of food that's being done with the honey, but it's a major project. And evidently, in the parade last week, there were some people now changing from their normal costume for that particular parade. They're now going to be doing the bee.
Really?
San Miguel Allende, yeah.
That's amazing. I would absolutely love to go there and visit. So, yeah. I would get bee pictures as well, yes.
Oh, thank you so much for your very informative presentation and sharing your expertise. Wonderful.
Thank you.
My name is Steve, and been a beekeeper for 4 years now, and a member of the Los Angeles County Beekeepers Association that was founded in 1873. Now, sitting here as a beekeeper, I started to feel a little guilty because there is you just brought up the point, there's competition between native bees and honeybees, and I'm a beekeeper, and I can do it to help pollination and, of course, get the liquid gold. Yep. But what's the solution now besides community awareness about native bees? I learned so much about native bees, and I'd like to invite you to speak at our club on whenever you get a chance, and I'll talk to you about that later. But what's the solution as far as the competition between native bees and honeybees, or what should beekeepers like myself be aware of?
I wish there was an easy answer on what was the solution. I personally feel, because this is a conversation I've had with a lot of people, so I'm just going to say what I personally feel. Education is the number one tool that we can use to get the facts out there. So also with beekeepers, I think it's also really important to make sure that they manage their hives well so they aren't getting out into nature. I think honeybees are absolutely fascinating. I think they're very cool creatures, but we also need to be aware that they are farm animals. They don't actually help with the biodiversity or the pollination of native landscapes. So honestly, I encourage people to kind of get out of beekeeping, but if they do want to do it, just very well manage the hives so they don't get out into nature. I wish I had a better answer than that, honestly. That would make a lot of beekeepers happy, but I don't.
Well, thank you. Yes, we had shared a booth, an educational booth, right next to Theodore Payne, and that topic, there wasn't an answer either.
Yeah, no. Also, I think it is kind of like a short-term versus long-term solution too, because you can have like bumblebee hives, like bumblebees are native. Those are really fun to farm as well. They don't produce the same amount of honey as a honeybee, but I feel like you can get a lot of the same joy out of them. So maybe that's an option. Yeah, I call honeybees my gateway bees because they were really my gateway to nature.
If a person's interested in a succulent garden, would that attract bees too?
Succulents do attract bees as well. There's a lot of succulents that people like in Southern California that are Mediterranean, especially from like Southern Africa, that do really well in this climate, and they definitely attract a lot of bees. So you'll find a lot of the generalist pollinators on them. So like the leaf cutter bees just obviously not cutting leaves, but collecting like nectar and pollen. You'll also find the little sweat bees, visit those as well. Yeah, osmia. Yeah, don't kill them. Yeah. All right, thank you.